Hello, I'm David Hayward, a writer and consultant in the fields of Christian ministry and ministerial formation. This video is part of a unit on experiential learning for tutors, supervising ministers, and all those involved in ministerial formation. In it, we focus on the psychology of learning, and in particular on the idea of the learning cycle, which has been around since the 1980s. There is an exercise I have used for over 30 years to help people to engage with this area. It consists of asking them to draw a picture to represent the way they understand the church. The picture could be representational, with pictures of buildings with steeples, for example. Or it could be diagrammatic, or symbolic, or any combination of these. Next, I asked people to get into groups of 3 to show their pictures and explain them to one another. Each time I lead this exercise, I can bank on 2 things being the case. All the pictures are different, but everyone can recognize that each of them expresses an idea of what we understand by church. In other words, everyone has an existing mental picture of the church, which I've labelled small c in this diagram. It emerges from our past experience as big C, the church as it exists in the real world, constantly impinges on us. Going to services, attending PCC meetings, reading about the church in books or newspapers, seeing portrayals of clergy on TV, and so on. And small c, the church in our heads, forms a theology of the church, what Jeff Astley has called ordinary theology, the theology of someone who has had no formal theological training. Every member of every congregation has an ordinary theology of church, and everyone selected to train for the church's ministry brings their existing understanding of the church with them when they begin their training. So what happens when we experience the church? We don't just passively take it in, we compare it with everything else we already know about church, and we interpret the new experience to fit in with our existing understanding. Most important of all, our concepts of church and of everything else are made up of much more than knowledge and beliefs. They include opinions, emotions, values, attitudes, and behaviour. Most of our knowledge is held with emotional commitment, and as teachers of Christian faith, that is how we want it to be. We want our congregations and our ministerial students to see their faith as important and to care. But for those in ministerial training, this means that they enter the classroom with deep convictions, whether about sin and salvation, the relation of Christianity to other faiths, styles of worship, styles of evangelism, and much more besides. All this means that we all have to jettison any idea of teaching as one-way communication. If you're a teacher in ministerial training, you'll not teach effectively simply by providing information. You'll have to think about how to engage with your students' existing experience of whatever subject you're teaching. When I taught Old Testament to reader candidates, I had to assume that many of them were unfamiliar with the text. Beyond the 10 Commandments and the Christmas readings, the Old Testament was a closed book, at least to some. What they were familiar with, however, was hearing the Bible read in church. Most were familiar with using the Bible in personal devotions, and a few would have used it in preaching. All had an existing theology of the Bible, and my teaching was interacting with it at every point. If you're anything like me, you won't find this easy. Everything I'm sharing here conflicts with my natural temperament. I would love to be able to put together a pre-digested version of what I want people to take away and pass it over to them, lovingly gift-wrapped. I constantly have to remind myself that this is not the way people learn. No matter how cogent my arguments, how clear my explanations, The learners will only take it in if they are given plenty of chance to work with it. Rather than the sage on the stage, I need to become a guide on the side. Since the work of David Kolb in 1984, it has been usual to think of the learning process as a cycle with 4 phases: experience, reflection, conceptualization, and action. In order to learn from new experience, we must first of all pay attention to it. Begin to grapple with it until we understand it, form a concept for it, and then start putting it into practice. Although expressed as a cycle with one phase leading to the next, in fact, in the process of learning, all these phases are interacting with each other. The diagram is helpful, though, because it reminds us that when we design a learning session, we need to incorporate all 4 phases of the cycle. We need to give our students the chance to hear and understand new information, reflect on it in the light of their existing experience, make sense of it, and then apply it to their situations. The rest of this video will explore the learning cycle in greater detail. Experiences that lead to new learning can be of all types. They might be formal, such as reading a book, taking part in a group session, reading a newspaper, magazine, or instruction manual. Watching this video is an experience of formal learning. Experiences of learning may also be informal, the kind of things that just happen: a casual conversation, enjoying a holiday, having an argument, getting lost, being involved in an accident, getting ill, having a baby, or suffering a bereavement. Your contribution to ministerial formation is an example of formal learning. But for the students, it is one element in a variety of learning events, formal and informal. Whatever your subject, they will also be learning about it outside the episodes of formal learning that you lead. Your challenge is to link the formal learning you provide, as far as possible, with that informal learning. The next phase of the cycle is reflective observation. Our experience, whether formal or informal, sparks off all kinds of thoughts and feelings. We wonder about it. We connect it with things we have heard or read or experienced in the past. All this may happen extremely quickly, or we may go on reflecting for a long time, months, or even years. But sooner or later, we arrive at a conclusion about what is significant about this new experience. I'm not sure these conclusions are always abstract, as Kolb thinks, so in this slide I've simply called this phase conceptualization. At the conceptualization phase, the new information or the experience becomes part of our picture of the world. There are broadly 2 ways in which this takes place. Mostly we assimilate the new experience to our existing picture. The book or newspaper article adds some new information that backs up the way we already think. The argument with our colleague confirms our opinions about them. Sometimes, however, the new learning changes the way we look at things. Our concepts, feelings, or values are changed in some way, or even completely transformed. We emerge with a new picture of the subject, or even of our whole world. Learning is not complete without the 4th phase, active experimentation. Really, to learn something, we have to put it into practice. Sometimes this will be in a concrete way through deliberately planning to do things differently. Mostly it means that we approach the situation with new eyes, or even with new values, with our understanding enhanced, or with new priorities. Many people involved in ministerial formation will already be familiar with this cycle, because it is almost the same as the cycle of theological reflection. The only difference is that at the reflection and conceptualization stages, we deliberately turn to the Bible or Christian tradition to help us to come to a conclusion about where God is in the situation. That's why TR is so crucial. It's the way we bring God into the learning process that is going on all the time. Another feature of the cycle is that the thought processes taking place at each phase are different. In the experience phase, we need to pay attention to the new experience without trying to impose a pre-existing interpretation on it. Whereas at conceptualization, we narrow down the possibilities to a decision about what it means for us. Whereas reflection is largely internal, with the focus on previous experience and how it helps us to make sense of things, action is outwardly focused, with the emphasis on the present and the future. Because of this, nearly everyone is more at home at one point of the cycle than others. David Kolb and then two researchers called Peter Honey and Alan Mumford identified 4 different learning styles that echo the 4 stages of the learning cycle. Honey and Mumford devised a questionnaire to help people work out their preferred learning styles. Here's a short summary of some of the implications of the way people learn, each of which affects the way we need to plan formal learning. All formal learning takes place in a context in which people are learning informally all the time. The purpose of informal learning is to orientate ourselves in the world. So formal learning must also contribute to this. That means people must see the point of what they're learning. People always bring a network of existing concepts based on previous experience to any learning event. Deep learning takes place when people are enabled to use the new knowledge that they are given to interpret the world. And to achieve this, people need to engage with the new information by working with it. Most people watching this video will already have begun to think about how understanding the learning cycle can help us to become better teachers or coaches. For those following the program, Formation for Enabling Ministry, this is a topic we return to at stage 3, when we look at the pedagogies of ministerial formation.